We all know cost of living is hitting Australian families and anyone on a fixed income. But GDP figures released today reveal just how much households have cut back in the last quarter. Overall GDP growth has slumped from 2.1% to 1.5%, not unexpected given the tightening of interest rates. But what's telling is that household consumption grew by just 0.1%, declining in per capita terms. Joining me now for his analysis on this and more, business commentator at the Herald Sun, Terry McCrann. Well, first up, Terry, as far as I can make it out in per capita terms, this is Australia's third quarter of negative growth. So it confirms that in terms of per head of population, we're in recession. We're still in recession. It's getting worse if you look at this quarter's set of numbers, and that's why we all feel worse off.
Peter, these figures describe an economy that is sick, very sick. And the more you dig into the detail, as you describe it, the worse it looks. Let's start with those headline numbers. Every quarter, the growth rate has stepped down. So we finished the year with a growth rate of just 0.2%, which is effectively standing still. And over the whole of 2023, we had a growth rate, again, as you noted, of 1.5%. That, apart from the COVID years, that is the lowest full-year growth rate we've seen, wait for it, since 2000. 23 years ago, we had a growth rate this low. Even at the bottom of the GFC, we didn't have an annual growth rate this low. That's the overall number. And we're only getting to that overall number because of two things. That massive population growth, again, as you emphasised, Peter, restate these numbers on per head terms, and that's what matters to individual Australians. Big numbers don't matter. It's what's actually happening to them individually, personally. Individually, we've gone backwards. We are clearly in a per capita recession, and there isn't any obvious exit. There's no sort of gateway we can walk through come the middle of 2024.
What does my head in, Terry, is the number of people in the media who reported all of this today is somehow great, fantastic, positive news. You know, they see a plus in the front of some of this economic data. That's all they see. That's all they can understand. They talked about electricity and groceries, the consumption there rising by 0.7%. Well, fair enough. Electricity, you have to pay for it. Groceries, you have to feed your family. But anything that was discretionary, that was down, even though this last quarter was the Christmas period. So you're right, that tells you how crook things are. And I reckon the government will look at all of this and they'll run into the May budget and they'll start throwing more money at perceived problems. And of course, that fuels inflation.
Well, exactly, Peter. As I say, there is no exit, and the sort of exit that Jim Chalmers might seize upon is just going to make the situation worse. The obvious reality is what matters to individual Australians. None of this tells us about the cost of living crisis. We've got an economy which is battling, and equally we've got this continued cost of living pressure, which reflects itself in exactly those numbers, Peter, that you're desperately maintaining spending. You have to maintain spending on the necessities, and discretionary spending goes by the wayside. And that feeds back into a negative loop, into the businesses that impacts, the negativity that flows across the economy, and that flows back again to employment prospects and wage prospects. And then bring in the level of interest rates and the pressure on household budgets from those home loan repayments. So none of this can in any way be described as positive. It's all negative.
And of course, at the same time as businesses are doing it tough, you've got the ACTU. This is big news today, running out on a push to enable union delegates to get onto your work site to recruit people for the union. Now, until now, they've only been allowed on a site to represent members. If they didn't have members on that building site or business site or, workplace, they couldn't go on there. We know there's less than 9% of Australians in the private sector workforce who even belong to a union, so they effectively shut out of a lot of workplaces, and I think a lot of workers like that as well. Now they want to be able to walk in straight in your front door, whether you like it or not, whether your workers want them there or not. And I guess my concern, this could be a return of the sort of standover tactics that some of these militant unions are famous for?
Peter, it's all part of a matrix of policy moves that we're getting from the federal government, which is trying to recreate the reality of union power from the 1970s, the sort of union power that a sensible Labor government in the Hawke-Keating government realised had to be modified. You had to get industrial relations reform back in the 1980s in order to get productivity, in order to get the jobs growth, the real jobs growth that we need and what the workers need. I mean, this is a desperate sort of ploy by both unions and this government to try to force people back into the straitjackets of being part of unions and part of that negotiating process. And, you know, big business might be able to cope with it. It will be devastating, though, the further it goes, for small and medium-sized businesses, and again, ultimately, for the job prospects, for the wage prospects of ordinary workers. This is not a process which is going to lead to jobs and wage increases.
Well, thank God you've got a long history in IR, and thank God, Terry, you could read these numbers, unlike most of your colleagues in the journalistic endeavour. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.